None of us grew up with the image of Noah as a land divider, as a patriarch who not only saved humanity after the flood, but also set boundaries for every lineage that followed. We know him as the ark builder, the obedient servant of God, the survivor. But rarely is it told that after the flood, Noah did something extraordinary. He divided the world into portions, territories, and regions to be given to his 16 grandsons. In the Book of Genesis, this detail is entirely absent. But in the Book of Jubilees, a text excluded from the canonical Bible, it is recorded with meticulous detail. The name of each grandson, the name of each region, the boundaries defined by mountains, rivers, and seas. Each grandson, sons of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, was given a specific portion of land, accompanied by a covenant. No one was permitted to leave their assigned land, and certainly no one was allowed to seize the land given to their brothers. If that happened, a curse would fall, not as an immediate punishment, but as an inevitable consequence set within the sacred order established by God. Have you ever heard of this? Has anyone ever taught you that the history of nations, from Babylon to Ethiopia, from Europe to South Asia, might have been divided since the waters of the flood receded? The silence of the traditional Bible on this matter is not just an omission, it is a mysterious void. A sacred blueprint buried, hidden, replaced by geopolitical maps and borders drawn by human power, wars, and ambitions. Yet, the strangest thing is this. If you overlay a modern genetic map, particularly the Y-DNA map of humanity, onto the land division of Noah as described in Jubilees, you will see something that cannot be explained by mere chance. The 16 groups of people, corresponding to the 16 grandsons, appear clearly in the history of global migration. And in many cases, the regions where certain haplogroups are most prevalent align in an astonishing way with the lands Jubilees says they were given. Is this just a coincidence, or is it a trace of a forgotten covenant? A map buried in scripture, but never erased from the world. We simply stopped looking, stopped believing, stopped remembering, but that map, it's still there, and perhaps it still shapes how humanity divides itself to live and to suffer. Not long after Noah divided the lands among his grandsons, something happened. Some of them abandoned their assigned territories. Not out of necessity, not because of natural disasters, but because they rejected the sacred order, a silent but consequential refusal. They didn't just migrate, they encroached upon lands that did not belong to them, lands God had designated for another lineage. The Book of Jubilees recounts the most striking detail. Canaan, son of Ham, stubbornly seized the land of Shem, the fertile region that would later become the Middle East, the cradle of Jewish, Arab, and Abrahamic civilizations. Despite warnings, despite his own father Ham trying to stop him, Canaan stayed. And that act became the beginning of a curse, a dark current weaving through millennia. What's chilling in Jubilees is not a violent punishment. There is no fire from heaven, no earthquake, no thunder. The curse comes as a natural consequence. Those who live in the wrong land, they will not receive blessing. The land itself will resist them. Their descendants will live in chaos, war, division, and exile. And so, history began to repeat a cycle of stories that humanity calls fate. From Assyria's invasion of Babylon to the Greek Empire trampling Egypt, From the Crusades to the spread of colonialism across the world, how many of these were consequences of entering forbidden lands? Every time humans crossed a sacred boundary to seize a territory not theirs, peace vanished, and something in the collective spirit cracked. Hatred began, lingering across generations, as if something unseen had been unleashed and could not be sealed again. Could it be that this curse still echoes? Are the lands embroiled in war today the very ones violated long ago, where covenants were broken, where misplaced bloodlines took root? Are there nations bearing consequences not for their own sins, but for an ancient promise betrayed by their ancestors? And if this curse is not a punishment, but an echo of disobedience, then it may still be at work. No miracles or overt penalties needed, simply living in the wrong place. Living apart from one's roots, living out of alignment with the place God ordained, and from that, collapse comes, quietly but inexorably. The world after the flood was not a blank slate. It was a restart, but not without direction. God did not leave humanity to drift aimlessly after the global cleansing. And Noah, as the father of a new humanity, did not merely rebuild life. He laid the foundation for a sacred order of land and lineage. The book of Genesis stops at Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But it is the Book of Jubilees, excluded from the canonical Bible, that reveals the rest of the story. It goes further. It speaks not only of the 3 sons, but of Noah's 16 grandsons, each representing a branch of humanity, each given a specific region of the world. Chapters 8 and 9 of Jubilees paint a primal map of humanity. A map not based on political borders, but on God's division through Noah. Not just directions, but names of rivers, mountain ranges, great seas, natural boundaries, all used as markers. Names like Gihon, Euphrates, the Garden of Eden, Mount Rapha, appear not as symbols, but as vivid geographical landmarks. And most importantly, each portion of land came with an oath and a curse. Anyone who seized land not their own, or left the land God ordained for their lineage, would face consequences. Not because of harsh laws, but because an unseen order governs geography and the soul. An order now forgotten. The list of the 16 grandsons, as recorded in Jubilees, includes Elam, Asher, Arpachshad, Lud, Aram, sons of Shem, Cush, Mizraim, Phut, Canaan, sons of Ham, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, Tiras, sons of Japheth. Each one the origin of a nation, each land they received, a sacred home for thousands of years to come. And from this, the first map of humanity was drawn by faith, by covenant, by divine will. If we look back at history and map modern nations onto that list, are we living on the lands of our ancestors? Or did the first deviations set the course for humanity's fractured history? When Noah divided the land among his 16 grandsons, he did not do so arbitrarily. The division was not based on whim, power, or political need. In the Book of Jubilees, particularly chapters 8 and 9, each portion is defined by clear natural boundaries, mountain ranges, rivers, seas, and even astronomical directions. These were not just physical boundaries, they were sacred boundaries, witnessed by God and enacted by Noah as a representative of divine will. We encounter names that seem to belong to legend. The river Gihon, once flowing around Eden, Mount Rapha, standing in the far north like a stone wall separating the cold lands, or the Garden of Eden, not merely a symbol of origins, but a map marker. From there, boundaries are described as from Mount Rapha to the mouth of the river Tena, from the Eastern Ocean to the Red Sea, from the river Euphrates to the plains of Ashur. No modern map accompanies the text, but the language in Jubilees allows those patient enough to reconstruct this divine map step by step, through ancient names, through the rising sun, through the flow of ancient rivers. This shows it was not a mere division. It was a concrete expression of sacred order, where each lineage was placed in a space suited to their role and mission in God's plan. In a world without national borders or satellite maps, Noah, guided by God's light, established a spiritual geography. And that map carried a warning: those who cross its boundaries cross out of grace. Each mountain, each river did not just divide land, it divided destinies. Remarkably, when comparing the lands described in Jubilees with the distribution of major populations today, we find astonishing alignments. This is not chance. It may be evidence that Noah's map never vanished. It was only obscured by the political maps humans created to replace a sacred order now forgotten. In the modern world, genetic science has redrawn the map of humanity's ancestors through Y-DNA groups. The genetic lines passed from father to son through the Y chromosome. What's astonishing is this: scientists have identified roughly 16 major Y-DNA haplogroups, and they almost correspond to the 16 direct descendants of Noah in the Book of Jubilees. Is this mere coincidence, or a remnant of an ancient blueprint long forgotten? Each haplogroup, from R, J, E, T, L, Q, N, O to I, has a distinct geographical distribution, and the regions where they are most prominent align in a striking way with the lands Jubilees says were given to Noah's grandsons. For example, haplogroup J, tied to the Middle East and Near East, aligns with the land of Shem, ancestor of the Jews, Arabs, and Ashur. Haplogroup E, prominent in North and East Africa, matches the land of Cush and Mizraim, descendants of Ham. Haplogroup R, covering Europe and parts of Asia, reflects the land given to Japheth and his sons like Gomer, Magog, and Madai. Haplogroup Q, strong among indigenous peoples of the Americas, suggests some descendants of Japheth crossed seas to the far west, as Jubilees describes. The deeper researchers go, the more astonished anthropologists become at this hidden arrangement they cannot fully explain. A modern genetic map, aligning with an ancient map in a religious text excluded from the Bible. Could it be that this order of lineage was written before maps, before written language, before humanity recorded its own history? If so, the Book of Jubilees is not mere myth. It is a spiritual genetic code. It preserves an ancestral pattern that could not be invented by guesswork. A pattern preordained, encoded in genetics, in geography, and in the oath of the patriarch. Coincidences are accepted in science, but when coincidences repeat with uncanny precision, we must ask, is this still random, or a voice from the past we've refused to hear. A map buried in sacred texts, now alive in the very DNA of modern humanity. And if this is evidence, then the curse, the promise, and the sacred order of old may never have faded. After the ark landed and the waters receded, Noah did not just resume life, he established an order, not only of morality or worship, but of space. Who lives where, which land belongs to which lineage, and who is responsible for stewarding the land given to them. In chapters 8 and 9 of Jubilees, this is described as a solemn ritual, no less sacred than a holy covenant. Noah prayed before dividing the land. He did not decide on his own. Everything was done in reverence for God. To ensure its sanctity and transparency, he called his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, as witnesses. Before them, he declared the boundaries revealed by God, assigning each region to each grandson. But the crux lies not in the division, but in the oath that accompanied it. Noah made his 3 sons swear before God that none of their descendants could leave the land assigned to them or encroach on the land of their brothers. He made it clear, if anyone did so, they and their descendants would bear a curse, not just in their lifetime, but for generations to come. This covenant was not just a promise. It was a spiritual contract, binding land, blood, and sacred duty. And like every sacred covenant in Scripture, it came with consequences, blessing for the faithful and cursing for the betrayers. This curse was not an immediate calamity, but an invisible fracture in the course of history. Loss of peace, internal wars, decline through generations. Ancestors betray, descendants pay. Not because God punishes, but because the sacred order itself was disrupted, like a spiritual mechanism operating beyond human will. The question is not just who lives where, but do we still remember which land we were given? And if we've forgotten, are we living on someone else's land? And if so, is the curse of old still unfolding silently? In the entire covenant of land division, no one is mentioned more than Canaan, not because he was specially blessed, but because he was the first to violate the sacred covenant. Canaan, son of Ham, chose to stay in a land not his own, the land given to Shem, the region between the Red Sea, the Euphrates, and the Persian Gulf, today's Middle East. Jubilees describes this moment with gravity. Ham reminded his son, Canaan's brothers spoke up. They did not deny the beauty or fertility of the land, but they reiterated the covenant. This is Shem's land. No one from Ham's house may live there. But Canaan ignored them all. He chose to stay. No permission, no obedience, no turning back. And that act created an irreparable crack in humanity's spiritual geography. From that moment, a vortex opened. Canaan settled in Shem's land, the region that became Palestine, Israel, Lebanon, Syria, a place of unending conflict throughout history. Not just territorial wars, but wars of identity, of promise, and of curse. The nation of Israel, descendants of Shem, continually fought to reclaim the promised land. Meanwhile, the Canaanite peoples, descendants of Ham, were seen as usurpers, bearing the image of disobedience. And then the curse in Jubilees resounds. Cursed be those who enter their brother's land. They will have no peace, no roots, no name preserved. A curse, not as an instant punishment, but a profound disruption in the sacred order, sending history off course, leaving later generations in a fractured memory they cannot comprehend. From Babylon, Assyria, Greece, Rome, to the Crusades and modern wars, the Middle East has always been a land ablaze. But in the light of Jubilees, the root lies not in religion or politics, but in a decision from the post-flood era, when one son chose to live in the wrong land, pulling his lineage into a curse spanning thousands of years. Could it be that today's unresolved wars are the aftershocks of that first act of disobedience? If so, what is repeating in our time? And who will be the next Canaan? Throughout history, many have debated Noah's curse in Genesis. Why did he curse his son's lineage? Why did Canaan bear the consequence instead of Ham, who saw his father in a shameful state? But when we place this story alongside the Book of Jubilees, something becomes clear. Noah's curse was not about personal offense. It was a prophetic consequence. He did not curse Ham, but Canaan, because he foresaw what would happen. He knew Canaan would break the covenant, would settle in Shem's land, would disrupt the sacred structure of the new world. And from that act, Canaan's lineage would enter a history of chaos, where they would have no true home, living amid conflict, erased, or made objects of war and slavery. Noah's curse was not magic. It was not superstition. It was a warning about the mechanism of sacred order. If you leave the land assigned to you, if you encroach on your brother's land, your lineage will lose protection, lose connection to identity, and will cast itself into uncertainty, strife, and ultimately self-destruction. This repeats throughout Scripture. Abraham was promised land, but had to wait 400 years because the iniquity of the Canaanites was not yet complete. Israel reclaimed the land, but when they lived wrongly, they too were exiled. It all revolves around the order of land, not just in geography, but in the soul. Those who live in their given land dwell in blessing. Those who abandon it embark on a path outside salvation. Noah did not curse to exact revenge. He cursed because he knew what happens when humans defy divine order. Like a father warning his child about a cliff ahead, not to punish, but to preserve life. If so, in our time, as borders are redrawn by wars, as people migrate en masse due to poverty, oppression, or ambition, are we witnessing similar consequences? Are modern humans repeating Canaan's story, not in words, but in actions, in defiance, in erasing boundaries to create their own order? The curse, in the end, does not come from God. It comes when humans separate themselves from the order God established, stepping into the darkness they themselves have opened. If we read the Book of Jubilees as an ancient theological guide, it's easy to dismiss its warnings as vague or distant. But when we place Jubilees alongside human history, especially the history of conquests and empires, one thing becomes clear. We are living in the consequences of the violations Noah warned against. From the Babylonian Empire invading Assyria to the Assyrian Empire conquering Israel, all were instances of crossing boundaries set in the covenant. In the days of ancient Greece and Rome, armies expanded far beyond their origins, marching into lands not theirs, from the Middle East to North Africa, from Europe to the Nile. They did not just take land, they imposed cultures, destroyed worship, altered the spiritual order of native peoples. In modern times, the invasions of European empires, Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, continued this cycle, colonizing the Americas, plundering Africa, subjugating Asia, forcing millions of indigenous people to live without land, identity, or connection to their original sacred order. It seems every empire was driven by the same urge, to seize land not theirs. The result? The lands taken often became centers of crisis, where war, discrimination, instability, and division persist. The peoples once subjugated now rise to reclaim their land, but even they no longer recognize their true roots. They fight, but against a wound buried too deep, the wound of a sacred order broken. History, like a clouded mirror, reflects what Jubilees warned. And if we look closely, we must ask, is much of the human history we learn in school actually the history of violating a sacred covenant? The history of Canaans succeeding one another, step by step, generation by generation, seizing lands not theirs, then bearing the unspoken curse. In this light, we don't just reread the past, we see through the present. Today's crises of land, identity, war, and exile may not be merely social, but spiritual consequences yet unresolved. And the most chilling thought, we may be living in a history of violations while believing we're on the right path. If we view the Book of Jubilees as an ancient geographical record, it holds a hidden map of the post-flood division, not drawn with modern national borders, but with sacred landmarks, rivers, mountains, seas, the rising sun, and directions. Though the text includes no illustrated map, its detailed descriptions allow us today to reconstruct that ancient map and compare it to the modern one. In this division, Japheth, Noah's eldest son, was given the largest portion, from the far north, icy and unpopulated, to the plains of Eurasia. Jubilees clearly describes Japheth's territory stretching from west-northwest to the far east, encompassing what are now Russia, Ukraine, Northern Europe, and extending to distant northern islands. Some scholars suggest even Siberia and parts of northern Asia fell to him and his sons, like Gomer, Magog, Madai, and Javan. Shem, the son who received the blessing, was given the central lands. From the Rapha Mountains in the north, some identify with the Caucasus, through Mesopotamia, encompassing the entire Middle East, along the Euphrates, stretching to India and parts of Central Asia today. This was the Middle Land connecting the first civilizations, Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, Assyria, Israel, and later Arabia. It was in this land that the great religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, emerged, fitting Shem's sacred role in salvation history. Ham, the son who acted disrespectfully, was assigned the southern lands, North Africa, West Africa, the Sahel, coastal Ethiopia, and notably, the tropical islands far beyond the Great Sea. Lands full of sun, fertile but vulnerable to invasion and conquest. His descendants like Cush, Mizraim, Phut, and Canaan spread across Africa, from Egypt to Sudan, from Somalia to the Red Sea regions. Some researchers suggest the islands mentioned in Ham's portion may include the Indian Ocean islands, Madagascar, and even extend to Southeast Asia. These details are not merely literary descriptions. When overlaid onto a modern map, an unexpected order emerges. This order is not based on skin color or language, but on ancestral origins, the places where the first bloodlines of each branch of humanity were meant to settle. And from this, a question arises. If that sacred map is real, are today's territorial upheavals touching a deeper order than we realize? An order that, once violated, causes history itself to unravel. When modern science began decoding the history of our ancestors through genetic markers, what was discovered did not merely complement scripture. It sometimes reflected in startling ways the descriptions in excluded texts like the Book of Jubilees. In it, the three major branches of Noah's descendants, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, are not just present in myth or genealogy, but are mirrored by Y-DNA haplogroups, genetic codes passed from father to son, unchanged across hundreds of generations. Haplogroup E, considered one of the most prevalent in North, Central, and East Africa, particularly in Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Egypt, is a marker that aligns with the descendants of Ham, Cush, Mizraim, Phut. The land Noah assigned to Ham, according to Jubilees, was Africa and the southern islands. Intriguingly, haplogroup E is also prominent in regions once used as colonial outposts or centers of the slave trade, as if echoing the curse Canaan was destined to bear. Haplogroup R, dominant in Europe and parts of Central Asia, reflects the lineage of Japheth, who was given the vast northern lands. Subgroups of R, like R1A, common in Eastern Europe and India, and R1B in Western Europe, seem to represent Japheth's branches, such as Gomer, Magog, and Madai. Archaeological data from the Bronze Age also show that R1A groups migrated from Ukraine, north of Shem's land, southward, leading to clear spiritual geographic conflicts. Haplogroup J, strongly present in the Middle East, including Israel, Arabia, Turkey, and Iran, is one of the oldest identified haplogroups, tied to biblical patriarchs like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all of Shem's line. Beyond a genetic trace, haplogroup J is linked to the cradle of the earliest civilizations, like Mesopotamia and the Fertile Crescent, the very land described as Shem's. What about the Americas? Jubilees does not explicitly mention the Western continent. But looking at genetic data, haplogroup Q, a distant descendant of Japheth, is prominent among indigenous peoples of the Americas, from North America, the Inuit, Navajo, to South America, the Quechua, Aymara. This raises the possibility that a branch of Japheth, perhaps Magog or Tubal, crossed the seas from the north via the Bering Strait or ancient maritime journeys to a land they did not know had been preordained. Science does not affirm faith. But when modern genetic patterns inadvertently echo the ancestral structure of a forgotten religious text, it may be time to stop calling it coincidence. These may be sacred encodings etched deep into the very body of humanity, as if God not only wrote history in books, but carved it into the blood we carry. In a modern world where borders are redrawn by war, politics, migration, and economics, the question of a true homeland seems increasingly vague. But if we heed the echo of the Book of Jubilees, an ancient question resounds as a sobering warning. Whose land is this, and who is living in a place they were not meant to settle. According to Noah, each lineage was given a specific portion of land, not just to live on, but to connect with their identity, mission, and sacred place in God's order. When a community leaves their designated land or seeks to take what is not theirs, they do not merely change their address. They sever themselves from an invisible bond, the harmony between land, blood, and soul. Living in the wrong territory is not simply a geographical act. It is a spiritual misalignment. Each land carries a spiritual frequency, a historical memory, a sacred compatibility with those to whom it was given. When a community resides on land not meant for them, even unintentionally, they may carry a fracture that spans generations, a sense of not belonging, inexplicable violence, internal fragmentation, and a fading of identity. It's not just poverty or war, it's a spiritual uprooting. This may explain why some nations remain unstable despite centuries of independence, why some communities forever long to return home even when they no longer know where home is, why historical pain passes from generation to generation not because of politics, but because of a deeper wound, a deviation from the place God ordained at the dawn of humanity. The question is not about geographical history. It is about fidelity to a sacred blueprint long forgotten. We, with global migration, urbanization, and economic conquests, have we stepped out of the land we were given? Are we living on land not meant for us? Is the deep unease in a nation's soul a sign that they are adrift from their original sacred place? If so, the greater question is, how do we return, not just to a physical homeland, but to spiritual roots? Perhaps the journey back is not about finding an ancient plot of land, but recognizing the portion to which our soul is called, and from there, restoring the covenant fractured between humanity and the land they were given. When Canaan defied the warnings and chose to settle in the land given to Shem, he was not just the first to break the covenant. He set a pattern of deviation, an undercurrent against the sacred order established after the flood. And the greater danger is this: that pattern became a silent template that humanity has repeatedly followed, not consciously but instinctively, driven by the thirst for power, territorial ambition, and the fear of scarcity. From Canaan to ancient empires, humans did not just want to live, they wanted to possess. They left their assigned lands, stepped into others' territories, and seized places not theirs. From that first moment, deviation became a global behavior, as if every generation since was born into a world already slipped from its spiritual axis. And from there, every migration, colonization, urbanization, and imperialism, though cloaked in the name of progress, carried the seed of that original disobedience. Canaan's descendants did not just live in the wrong place, they built kingdoms, erected fortresses, waged wars, as if the deeper they ventured into forbidden land, the more they tried to prove their existence was justified. But that very act made them the epicenter of enduring conflicts, erased from history or becoming symbols of fated disorder. And that story did not end with the Old Testament. In modern times, this deviation has spread further, from forced migrations, colonial regimes planting flags on lands not theirs, to sprawling cities rising on ancestral grounds leveled flat. The further we stray from our roots, the more we lose our inner compass. We no longer know who we belong to, where we're going, or why we stand on this land. Deviation is no longer an act, it has become a way of life, a mechanism that drives humanity to chase speed, conquest, and expansion without pausing to ask, where is my assigned land? Am I in Canaan's place? And if so, what is this breaking in me, in my community, in our history? From one person to a nation, from Canaan to today, straying from the given place always brings fracture. And history, if it does not pause, will keep flowing in the curse of those first errant steps. In most canonical Bibles, we catch only a fleeting glimpse of the land division after the flood. Genesis mentions Noah's 3 sons, then swiftly moves to a genealogy, without delving into how territories were divided, without mentioning the oaths, curses, or sacred covenants tied to each land. A silence spanning millennia, a gap seemingly harmless, but hiding a foundational loss. The Book of Jubilees, once deemed sacred in Ethiopian and pre-Talmudic Jewish traditions, is one of the rare texts that meticulously describes the land division, boundaries, curses for violations, and the role of each grandson in the post-flood map. But this book was excluded from the Catholic and Protestant canonical Bible. Why? Perhaps because it was too specific, too direct, too dangerous for those who wish to shape history by power rather than covenant. By omitting these details, the traditional Bible inadvertently left a critical theological void. No one remembers the connection between land, people, and oath. No one teaches that living on the wrong land can affect the collective soul. No one tells us that the very land we inhabit might be the unseen cause of conflicts never rightly named. That silence also made the curse invisible. It is no longer named, no longer recognized, but that does not mean it has vanished. Like an undercurrent pulsing beneath the earth, the curse still operates, in history, in culture, in the rootless longing many communities carry without knowing why. Why is the clear warning about Canaan found only in a forbidden book? Why was the land division, a sacred system, cut from the mainstream flow of Scripture? Perhaps because, if it had been preserved, questions about land ownership, national identity, and the sacred meaning of geography would have been too threatening to existing power structures. And perhaps that silence is why we walk unknowingly in violation. Without the sacred map in hand, we do not know the right path, which land is promised, which is forbidden. And in that silence, the curse lives on, not in books, but in the history we embody. Human history is a history of great civilizations: ancient Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, Greece, Rome, China, the British Empire, the United States. Each empire had its golden age, expanding, conquering, claiming distant lands. But there's a strange commonality. They all fell, not just from war or internal crises, but as if there were an invisible limit, a forbidden line in the spiritual realm. And crossing it caused everything to fracture. Jubilees does not use political language, but the language of order. It warns. Those who enter land not assigned to them, they and their descendants will have no roots. A warning that sounds like a fable until you look at history. The Roman Empire, from a small region by the Mediterranean, swallowed the Middle East, North Africa, and Western Europe. They entered lands assigned to Shem and Ham, and within centuries the empire crumbled, fragmented, invaded, leaving Europe in the darkness of the Middle Ages. The British, from a small island, built an empire where the sun never set. They stepped into India, Shem's land, Africa, Ham's land, and America, possibly Japheth's. But in the end, their empire shrank, leaving dozens of post-colonial nations in chaos, searching for identity. Even modern America, built by those who crossed seas from their ancestral lands, founded on the territory of native tribes, carries its own internal fractures, division, violence, identity crises. They prosper, but are strangely fragile, as if their prosperity stands on land that never fully accepted them. The question is not just who was strong, but were they in the right place? For if Jubilees' map is true, no strength can save those who stand in the wrong place in the sacred order, and collapse, if not from without, will come from within, like a soft curse, unraveling what humans thought they controlled. Perhaps we should read history not just through facts, but through a spiritual lens. Maybe great civilizations fell not because they were weak, but because they never belonged where they stood. And the land, as a living entity ordained by God, always finds a way to reject those who dwell against their destiny. In the modern world, we often see land as property, to be bought, sold, traded, or seized by power. But in the view of Jubilees, land is not an object to own. It is part of a sacred covenant, designated by God for specific lineages, roots, and spiritual purposes. When humans take land not theirs, the consequences go beyond political disputes. They open a deep wound where soul and history meet in disorder. Ancient cultures understood this. They did not see land merely as a place to farm or build, but as a sacred space where ancestors dwelled, where oaths were etched into wind and stone. To live on the wrong land, to them, was not just invasion. It was to lose connection with the divine, with origins, with the unseen protection from above. Jubilees states clearly, those who take sacred land, the land of another, lose blessing, live in disorder, and carry consequences across generations. And history proves it. Peoples forced from their ancestral lands, like the indigenous of the Americas, Jews in exile, or African tribes taken to other continents, lost not just their homes, but their spiritual wholeness. They live, but as if their souls still wander, with no place to rest. Conversely, those who take sacred land find no peace either. They may build castles, cities, nations, but beneath the concrete lie buried memories, unrested spirits, violated oaths. And the result? A modern society, advanced yet anxious, materially rich but starved for meaning, wealthy but fractured within. Psychology calls it disrupted collective memory. Theology calls it loss of blessing. But Jubilees says simply, it is the consequence of stepping out of the assigned land and into land promised to another. Though no thunder strikes from heaven, no immediate wrath descends, the sacred order still operates, silently and patiently, like a river beneath the earth, waiting to surge and drown all built on violation. And if this is true, then today the question is not where do we live, but are we standing on the land promised to us, or continuing the journey of one who does not belong? For in the end, the consequence is not just material. It is a collapse within, in a place no map can chart, but the soul feels more clearly than anyone. Not all suffering comes from poverty, oppression, or war. There are fractures in history that cannot be seen, cannot be measured by data or maps, yet continue to inflict pain like a slow blade through generations. And sometimes those fractures stem from an ancient act, leaving the assigned land or living in a place not given to the soul. Jubilees speaks of a curse for those who abandon their land, but the chilling truth is that this curse does not always manifest as immediate collapse. It can simmer like a hereditary disease in the collective soul, causing a people to carry unease, division, internal violence, and an inability to forge a clear identity. Look at communities forced to migrate through history. Africans sold to the Americas, Jews exiled from the Promised Land, Armenians after genocide, indigenous peoples confined to barren reserves. They did not just lose land, they lost connection to the sacred order, creating a void no wealth or politics can fill. But it's not only those forcibly displaced who bear consequences. Some communities willingly left their lands to chase ambition, to rise above, to find a new promised land. But in exchange, they left their souls in their old homelands. And from then on, in them, or their descendants, exists an unnamed void where they cannot connect, cannot find peace, cannot feel they belong. This unease is not personal. It seeps into culture, creating collective internal conflicts between old and new generations, between a severed past and an uncertain future. And strangely, it often appears in lands not assigned to them in Noah's sacred map. The question is not, do we have land, but is this the land promised to our souls? For if we live in the wrong place, though we build cities, institutions, nations, the collective soul still bears an inexplicable burden. And from that, history itself repeats cycles of pain, like a vortex burying the sacred once given. Perhaps not all suffering comes from enemies. Some comes from forgetting where we belong. And the fracture, unhealed by redirection, will keep spreading generation by generation in silence. Perhaps what we lack is not information, but spiritual direction. In a world flooded with geographical, political, and economic maps, modern humanity has everything except a map of the soul. And the Book of Jubilees, though excluded from the canonical Bible, may hold a missing piece, the sacred map of humanity, where every lineage, every community, every soul was assigned their portion. Is it time to reread that map, not to return geographically, but to return to spiritual roots, to reclaim the role and place our ancestors were given? For living in the assigned land is not just about location, it is a state of harmony between humanity, history, and God. And those who live in that place, poor or rich, minority or majority, will dwell in peace. Not everyone can return to their ancestors' physical homeland, but perhaps returning here means recognizing the land to which your soul belongs. Maybe you belong to a land, not because it sustains you materially, but because there your soul hears a deeper call. There, you need not fight to exist, compete to prove yourself, or suppress who you are to fit. There, you can be yourself, in a sacred way. Rereading the sacred map is a journey to recognize the invisible boundaries our ancestors revered, not out of law, but because they knew crossing them meant stepping into disorder. It is a map of harmony where each nation need not compete, but thrives in the land blessed for them. Only by remembering this can the world cease its cycle of conquest, rebellion, and destruction. If the curse began when Canaan lived in the wrong place, then blessing will begin when someone returns to their called place, not by passport or map, but by an inward redirection, a simple prayer. Lord, where is the land my soul belongs to? Lead me back. Perhaps we don't need more nations, just every soul returning to their assigned portion. And then, the peace the world seeks may simply be the natural result of a restored order. After all that has been unveiled, we can no longer see the Book of Jubilees as a mere ancient text. The lists of names, the boundaries of rivers and mountains, the curses and oaths, these are not side notes to a genealogy. They are the heart of a sacred blueprint, an invisible design God drew for humanity after the flood through Noah and his 16 grandsons. This is not just ancient geography. It is a spiritual system where each nation was settled in the land suited to their identity, role, and blessing. A land not just to live in, but to fulfill a promise, complete a mission, and preserve a piece of the order God established. Each portion is a soul's home, woven with both matter and sacred meaning. And we, in the rush of modern life, in a history distorted and maps redrawn, have forgotten that blueprint for far too long. We no longer ask, where is the land I belong to? But only, how much can I claim? The result is civilizations without roots, nations without identity, people living on land but unconnected to its soul. The 16 grandsons, representing all humanity, are not just the start of ethnology. They are a spiritual framework, and the lands they received were not random rewards, but a divine arrangement full of order and purpose. When someone strays to the wrong land, not only is blessing withdrawn, history itself can veer from the path of salvation. That blueprint still exists, though no one prints it on paper. It lives in forgotten texts, in the genetic code of nations, in the collective memory the soul still holds. And if anyone is humble enough to ask, Lord, where is my land? That blueprint may unfold again. Perhaps this world does not need more borders, but it needs to remember the sacred blueprint that once taught humanity who they are and where they belong. For only in returning to that can we truly be at home, not in the world, but in the soul. The story you've just heard may have happened thousands of years ago, written in a text few know, excluded from the canonical Bible, dismissed as an aside. But what lies within, the errant choices, the seized lands, the forgotten covenants, still quietly shapes how our world moves each day. Have you ever wondered if you, too, are living in the wrong place? Not geographically, but in your soul. Have your ancestors, or even you, unknowingly stepped out of the land you were given? Have you ever felt you don't truly belong where you stand, though everything seems stable and rational, Mahisia? 2019 seems to think so, and maybe it's because you're in exile in your own life. Could something in you be breaking that you don't understand? Perhaps it's an invitation to return, not to a physical land, but to the sacred place you've forgotten. Take a few minutes after this video to pause, not to find answers right away, but to recognize questions you've never dared to ask. Where are you, spiritually? Are you in exile within your own life? Is something in you breaking and you don't know why? It could be the echo of a sacred map you've lost. If something in you has been stirred, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Write down what you long to return to. It might be a lost faith, a rejected sense of belonging, a deep connection to ancestral land never reclaimed. Write it down so the curse no longer lingers. Write it down to give your soul's memory a chance to speak. For some boundaries are not meant to be conquered, but respected. Some lands do not belong to you, not because you're weaker, but because they belong to someone God has named. And conversely, somewhere in this world, there may be a portion of land or a place in the order waiting for you to return. This story doesn't end here. It will continue in how you walk after hearing it, in how you face the land you live on, in how you redefine homeland, identity, and soul. That story, where will it continue, if not in your own steps? Amen.